When everything shifted. There are days when you look in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back. This video is the story of my past 3 weeks in the US. Weeks when my marriage felt like it was slipping away, when learning English felt like pressure instead of purpose, and when one tiny shift changed everything. If you're tired, unmotivated, or quietly wondering whether you're just not good enough, then this story might sound a lot like yours. Life has a funny habit of walking in without knocking. My first week back in America was exactly like that. You know that strange feeling when you're trying to adjust to a new time zone, a new rhythm, a new version of yourself, and suddenly you realize your heart is running slower than everything around you? I felt that on the 3rd day after I landed. Not because of the weather, not because of work, but because something inside me felt off. As if I was losing something I didn't even know how to name. It started on a morning that looked perfectly normal. Sunlight came through the apartment window in California, cars hummed on the street below, and I sat with a cup of coffee, trying to warm up my English after a long flight. But guess what happened? My brain, always dramatic, decided to go on strike. Simple English sentences felt strangely distant, like hearing the voice of someone you used to be close to, but now you can't quite understand. That feeling, mixed with the quiet tension between me and my partner for the last 2 days, made me realize something uncomfortable. It wasn't English that was difficult. It was my heart that was shutting down. Here's the funny truth. We think our problems come from skills, but they usually come from emotions. Nobody tells you this, but when your relationship is strained, your ability to learn anything drops to 0. Your brain behaves like an employee on protest. Fix your feelings, then call me back. And I had been doing the exact opposite, pushing myself harder. During that first week, every time I opened an English book, I felt a tiny vibration inside. Not excitement. Not motivation. But the kind of inner warning that says, you're avoiding something. Someone. Maybe yourself. My marriage wasn't falling apart Hollywood style. No dramatic arguments, no door slamming. Just 2 people living together on different frequencies. My partner was overwhelmed with their own stress. I carried the emotional leftovers from months before. And when 2 people are out of sync, you start hearing a sound no one wants to hear. Silence. But in that silence, I started noticing things I had run too fast to see. I realized how often I dodged the real questions. How I used learning English as a productivity shield to avoid facing my feelings. How relationships don't break because of big explosions, but because of small words left unsaid. And then, at the end of that first week, something tiny happened. So small I didn't know it would shift the entire direction of my 3 weeks in America. But it did. And that's where the real journey began. The conversation in the car. Picture this. You're sitting in the passenger seat of a car moving 70 miles per hour on a California freeway, and somehow the silence feels louder than the traffic. That was me, staring out the window, pretending to admire the hills while my mind was twisting itself into knots. Silence has a way of making you confront things you'd rather ignore, especially in a marriage. And on that day, I felt every unsaid word bouncing around inside that car like loose change. The strange thing is, the conversation that changed everything didn't start dramatically. Nobody shouted. Nobody cried. It began with 5 simple words from my partner. You seem distant these days. You'd think that would open the floodgates, right? But no. My brain panicked like it had just forgotten how human communication works. It's ridiculous how a sentence in your native language can suddenly feel more complicated than any English phrase you've ever tried to learn. I turned my head, forced a smile, and said, "I'm okay." But we both knew okay was the biggest lie in the car. It's funny how relationships work. Your partner can sense your emotional weather even before you can. They don't need a forecast. They feel the storm forming. And mine felt it. The tension. The distance. The way I had been diving into English practice like it was my escape pod. We drove for a few minutes in that half-heavy silence until they said something that hit harder than I expected. "You don't talk to me the way you talk to your English lessons." Ouch. It was such a soft statement, but it sliced right through the shell I'd been hiding in. They weren't attacking me, they were telling me they missed me. And sometimes, missing someone you live with is the most painful kind of missing. My mind scrambled to explain, to defend, to justify. But what came out was something I didn't expect. "I'm scared I'm failing." Everything. There it was. The truth I hadn't even admitted to myself. Fear is a strange creature. It hides inside your routines, your habits, your studies. It disguises itself as busy. It whispers, "Just work harder, you'll be fine." But on that freeway, with nothing to distract me, I heard it clearly for the first time. My partner slowed the car, glanced at me, and said quietly, "You don't have to succeed alone. Not in English. Not in us." It wasn't a grand speech. No violins in the background. Just a simple reminder that connection doesn't come from perfection. It comes from honesty. And in that moment, something inside me softened. The distance shrank a little. Not enough to fix everything, but enough to begin. Funny how a moving car, something literally designed for going forward, can become the place where you finally stop running. The rest of that drive wasn't magical. We didn't resolve years of emotional clutter. But we broke open the door that had been shut. And for the first time in days, the silence didn't feel like a wall. It felt like space. Space to breathe, space to heal, space to speak again. Little did I know, that conversation was not the ending of the tension, but the invitation to the next chapter of this 3-week shift. A small English breakthrough. Imagine standing in line at a tiny American coffee shop, the kind with warm lights, soft music, and the smell of freshly ground beans swirling in the air. Now imagine your brain suddenly deciding that ordering a simple latte in English is equivalent to performing open-heart surgery. That was me, awkward, nervous, and overthinking every syllable like it was a life or death decision. It's ridiculous how the mind works. You can talk about deep emotions, marriage struggles, and painful truths. But ask you to say one vanilla latte, please, and suddenly your tongue becomes a confused noodle. But that moment, small as it was, turned into something unforgettable. I had stepped into the cafe to take a breather from everything. The conversation in the car, the tension at home, the weird emotional fog I'd been walking through all week. I thought a warm drink might hit the reset button. Instead, life hit me with a lesson disguised as a tiny English interaction. When it was my turn, I opened my mouth, ready for my usual hesitation. But before I could spiral, the barista, a young woman with a messy bun and smile that looked half awake, leaned forward and said softly, "Take your time. I got you." And something about those 4 words cracked the emotional ice I'd been carrying. Take your time. Not hurry up. Not can you speak clearly? Not next. Just a small, gentle reminder that I didn't have to rush. Not in English. Not in life. not in healing. So I breathed. And I said the sentence, slow, shaky, but real. 1 vanilla latte, please. She smiled like I'd just passed some secret test of humanity. Perfect, she said. Perfect. Not acceptable. Not good try. Just perfect. And that single word, from a stranger who would never know what was happening in my marriage or my mind, hit me harder than anything I'd heard all week. I found a seat in the corner and let the moment wash over me. It wasn't the English. It wasn't the latte. It was the way a tiny success, so tiny it could fit in the palm of your hand, had unlocked something in me. Like someone opening a window in a stuffy room. Psychologists say the brain needs micro-wins to reset motivation. Not big victories, just crumbs of progress. A clean dish. A made bed. A short walk. A tiny English sentence. These wins release a whisper of dopamine, telling your nervous system, see? You're capable. Keep going. And in that cafe, I realized I'd been starving myself of micro-wins because I kept chasing macro-perfection. Trying to fix my English, my emotions, my marriage. All at once. No wonder everything felt impossible. I wasn't failing. I was overwhelming myself. As I sipped my latte, I replayed the moment in my head. Not because of the English, but because it showed me something I'd been blind to. Healing doesn't start with big decisions. It starts with tiny courage. 1 sentence. 1 breath. 1 honest moment. I walked out of that cafe not magically repaired, not suddenly fluent, not instantly stronger. But I walked out lighter. And that was new. The small English breakthrough didn't solve my marriage problems. It didn't erase the silence or the fear. But it reminded me of something I had forgotten. I could still show up. I could still try. I could still move, slowly, gently, toward myself. And sometimes, that's the beginning of everything. 3 weeks of rediscovery. Here's a strange truth nobody warns you about. Sometimes your real transformation begins on a day that looks painfully ordinary. No fireworks. No dramatic breakdown. Just you, waking up in a quiet American apartment, realizing that something inside you needs to change, because staying the same suddenly feels heavier than moving forward. That's how the 21-day shift began for me. The morning after that tiny cafe breakthrough, I opened my eyes with a feeling I hadn't felt in weeks, a little space in my chest. Not peace. Not clarity. Just space. Enough for a new thought to slip in. What if I try again today, but softer? So I started my own 3-week experiment. Not the kind with checklists and strict goals. No wake up at 5 a.m., no study English for 2 hours, no fix your marriage by Friday. I was done with that version of me, always sprinting, always trying to prove something to myself or someone else. This experiment was simpler. Every day for the next 21 days, I would do 1 small thing for my English, and 1 small thing for my heart. On day 1, the English part was just listening to a 5-minute podcast while folding laundry. Honestly, I barely understood anything, and the host spoke like he was trying to break the sound barrier. But I stayed. Not to be perfect, just to be present. The heart part of day 1 was even smaller, sending my partner a message that said, "I made coffee if you want some." No emoji. No long explanation. Just an invitation to exist together again. Day 2 was messy. My English practice lasted exactly 3 minutes before my brain tapped out. My emotions were all over the place. But I showed up. And sometimes showing up is the win. By day 5, something interesting started to happen. My brain, this stubborn little creature, began to relax. Scientists call this the low-pressure learning zone, where your nervous system finally realizes you're not being chased by a tiger and decides to cooperate. In this zone, English stops feeling like a battlefield and becomes more like a conversation you're slowly warming up to. My marriage also began to warm up in tiny ways. Not big conversations. Just gentle ones. How did you sleep? Your soup smells good. Want to take a walk later? When a relationship has been strained, these small exchanges aren't small at all. They're oxygen. By day 10, I had stopped obsessing over fluency and progress. I discovered something more important. When you're emotionally safe, your brain lets you learn again. When you're not safe, even the alphabet feels like a threat. Around this time, I also noticed habits forming. I started reading one short English paragraph each night, even if it took forever. I started taking slow walks alone, just listening to the wind and my thoughts. I started talking to myself out loud. Yes, like a weirdo, practicing English sentences while dodging judgmental squirrels. And somewhere between day 12 and day 15, a quiet truth landed. Rediscovery isn't about becoming a new person. It's about remembering the parts of you that got buried. By day 18, my partner and I found ourselves sitting on the couch together, not talking about problems, not trying to solve anything, just sharing the same blanket, watching the same silly show. And that was enough. Healing doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sneaks in through moments like these. And by day 21, 3 weeks since everything shifted, I realized something profound. I wasn't chasing success anymore. I wasn't chasing fluency. I wasn't chasing perfection in my marriage. I was learning how to exist again. Gently, honestly, humanly, and strangely. Everything began to work again. The night I finally listened. There's a moment in every relationship where the universe gently grabs you by the shoulders, shakes you a little and whispers, "Hey, you're not listening." My moment arrived on a quiet Thursday night, around 10:47 p.m., in the living room of our apartment. At a time when the only thing I thought I was listening to was the humming refrigerator. It had been a long day. One of those emotionally soggy days when your thoughts feel like wet laundry that refuses to dry. My partner was sitting on one end of the couch scrolling through something, and I was on the other end pretending to practice English, though honestly, I wasn't practicing anything except avoidance. But the room felt full. Full in that way silence gets when two people are trying not to touch the same bruise. Then it happened. A moment so small, so gentle, so ridiculously easy to miss, that the old version of me would have walked right past it. My partner put their phone down, not dramatically, not with a sigh, just quietly placed it on the coffee table. A tiny gesture. But in a relationship, tiny gestures are often giant messages. They looked at me for a second and said, "Are you really okay?" Not the English answer. I mean the real one. That hit harder than any argument ever has. You know how the brain sometimes stalls like an old car? Mine did that. A full emotional freeze frame. Because for the first time in weeks, someone wasn't asking me to perform. They were asking me to be present. And here's the uncomfortable truth psychology likes to whisper. Humans are terrible at listening when we're busy protecting ourselves. We hear just enough to defend, but not enough to understand. I realized I had been hearing my partner's words, but not absorbing them. I had been nodding, answering, reacting, but not listening. Not with curiosity. Not with softness. Not with the version of myself I used to be before stress rewired my whole nervous system. So I did something my pride hated but my heart needed. I put my phone down too. That single movement felt like dropping a shield. We sat there in this strange, fragile silence. Not tense. Not heavy. Just honest. The kind of silence where both people are trying to decide whether to open up or shut down. And then I spoke. Not in perfect English. Not in perfectly organized thoughts. Just in the messy, trembling truth I had been avoiding. I feel like I'm failing everything at once. English. Work. Us. Myself. And I don't know how to say it without sounding weak. My voice cracked a little, which annoyed me, but also freed me. Because cracks are how the light gets in, right? My partner leaned back, exhaled slowly, and said something I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. Failing isn't the problem. Hiding is. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't one of those big dramatic movie lines. It was just real. And real hits differently. They told me they had noticed how tightly wounded I'd been since arriving in the US. How I'd thrown myself into English practice like I was running from something instead of learning something. How I'd been physically present but emotionally evaporating. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't defend myself. I didn't rationalize. I didn't explain. I just listened. Listening is weirdly powerful. Neuroscientists say that when you truly listen, your brain shifts out of threat mode and into connection mode. Oxytocin rises. Heart rate slows. Walls lower. It's the biological equivalent of opening a window in a stuffy room. And that night, I felt the window open. We ended up talking softly for almost an hour. No big confessions. No accusations. Just tiny truths passed back and forth like warm cups of tea. I miss talking to you. I didn't know what to say. Neither did I. I want us to feel connected again. Me too. Nothing resolved. And yet, everything shifted. Because the moment you finally listen, not to reply, not to win, not to escape, but simply to understand, your whole relationship exhale in relief. That night didn't fix my marriage. But it rebooted it. And sometimes, a reboot is more powerful than a resolution. Learning to hear each other again. During my 3 weeks in the United States, there was one lesson I kept returning to over and over again. It wasn't something I learned in a class, or on a tour, or from a book. It was something much quieter. Something easy to miss. Something I didn't even realize I had forgotten. The lesson was this. Listening is not the same as hearing. I think somewhere in the last year, my partner and I slowly lost that difference. We still talked. We still shared the basics of life. We still exchanged messages every day. But it felt like we were each speaking from our own little island, shouting across the water, hoping the other person would catch the meaning. And sometimes, even when the words reached the other side, the message didn't. I didn't notice how heavy that had become until I arrived in the US. The first few days were busy. New streets. New people. New rhythms. But once the excitement settled, a sort of stillness came over me. And in that stillness, I noticed how tired my heart felt, not from travel, but from carrying months of unspoken feelings. One morning in Seattle, I walked through Pike Place Market. It was early. Vendors were setting up their stalls. The air smelled like fresh bread and roasted coffee. People greeted each other in soft, familiar ways. Morning. You doing okay? Need a hand with that? Don't worry, I've got you. The phrases were simple. In English, yes, but simple enough for anyone to understand. Yet even with their simplicity, they felt warm. They felt human. And for a moment, I stopped walking and just listened. It struck me how gentle those small exchanges were, how people spoke not just with their voices, but with something softer, something kinder. And I realized, this is what we had been missing. Not words, but gentleness. Not sentences, but presence. It made me wonder when my partner and I had stopped talking like that. When did our conversations become so rushed? When did we stop checking in carefully, with patience instead of impatience? When did we forget how to listen to each other without trying to defend, explain, or predict? As I continued walking, I noticed how English speakers often use short, comforting phrases. I hear you. It's okay. Take your time. I'm listening. These weren't advanced vocabulary words. They weren't complex grammar structures. But they carried something deep, something my marriage needed. Because sometimes, the most important language in a relationship is not about fluency. It's about connection. That day, I made a small promise to myself. I would learn to listen again. Not the fast kind of listening. Not the reactive kind. But the slow, steady, patient kind. The kind that gives another person space to breathe. As I practiced this during my trip, something unexpected happened. I started hearing myself more clearly too. I heard my fears, my frustrations, my hopes, my longing for peace, my desire to feel close again. And instead of pushing those feelings away, I let them speak. Travel does that sometimes. When you're far from home, the noise inside you becomes easier to notice. And once you notice it, you can finally decide what to do with it. By the end of that week, I realized that the language of my marriage wasn't broken. It was just waiting for two people to slow down and listen again. Truly listen. So that became my mission for the rest of the journey. To relearn how to hear the person I love. To understand not only the words, but the emotions underneath. To speak more gently. To listen more deeply. And to remember that the hardest translation in life is often not between languages, but between hearts. Rediscovering what we still had. There is a strange moment that sometimes appears in the middle of a difficult season. A moment when you suddenly see something familiar as if it were brand new. That moment found me during the third week of my journey in the United States, on a quiet afternoon in Portland. And honestly, I didn't expect it to change anything. I was just walking slowly, letting the cool air clear my thoughts. I wasn't trying to fix my marriage. I wasn't trying to become a better communicator. I wasn't even thinking about learning English. I was simply tired. But life has a way of surprising you when your guard is down. As I passed a small cafe, I heard a couple talking behind me. Nothing special, just two people trying to understand each other. Their voices were soft, almost careful. The man said, "I'm trying. I just don't always know how." The woman replied, "I know. And I'm trying too." Simple words. Easy words. Words any English learner could understand. But those simple sentences hit me with unexpected force. Because that was exactly what my partner and I had been missing. We weren't lacking love. We weren't lacking effort. We were lacking the courage to say simple things out loud. As I kept walking, I felt something loosen inside me, like a tight knot finally letting go. I realized that I had spent months trying to win arguments, trying to be right, trying to be understood. But I had forgotten the simplest part of communication, letting the other person feel safe. And strangely, this connected directly to language learning too. When you learn English, you don't begin with the complicated parts. You start with simple words, simple sentences, simple emotions. Love works the same way. Healing works the same way. Human connection works the same way. Later that night, I sat alone in my small Airbnb room, listening to the quiet hum of the heater and the distant sound of cars outside. I whispered a single sentence to myself, almost like practicing English. I still choose us. It was slow, soft, honest. And it felt like rediscovering something I thought I had lost. That night, my partner and I spoke on the phone. At first, the conversation felt stiff, like we were reading lines from a script we didn't believe in anymore. But then something shifted. She said, almost shyly, "I miss the way we used to talk." And instead of defending myself or pretending not to care, I simply answered the truth. Me too. For the first time in a long time, we were speaking the same emotional language again. And here's the part one want you to hear, especially if you're watching this video because you're tired, discouraged, or ready to quit something important. You don't rebuild your life with big steps. You rebuild it with small truths. Sometimes the most powerful English sentence you'll ever say is also the simplest. I'm here. I'm trying. I still care. These words are not advanced vocabulary. They're not complicated grammar. But they carry the weight of healing. In the final days of my journey, I no longer felt lost. I wasn't fixed, and my marriage wasn't instantly perfect again. But I had rediscovered something essential, hope. And hope speaks every language. If you feel like giving up, on love, on English, on yourself, remember this. Progress doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a quiet conversation on a phone screen, or a soft confession in a cold Airbnb room, or a moment when you simply breathe out and admit, I want to try again. And that tiny moment might be the one that saves everything. The moment that changed the shape of my hope. There is a moment, somewhere near the end of every long journey, when life quietly asks you a question. Not out loud. Not in big dramatic movie-style music. Just a soft question slipping into your mind when you least expect it. My moment came during week 3 of my trip in the United States, on a calm Sunday morning in San Francisco. The sky was a pale blue, and the city had that sleepy weekend energy, a mix of fog, coffee smell, and people walking slowly like they were remembering how to breathe. I wasn't looking for meaning. I wasn't searching for a sign. Honestly, I was just trying to survive my feelings without falling apart in public. But life has its own timing. I found myself standing near the Golden Gate Bridge, watching the waves move in slow, patient strokes. And for a moment, everything around me felt strangely quiet, even though the city was alive. It was that kind of silence that feels like someone pressing a warm hand on your back. Not pushing you forward, just reminding you that you're still here. And then the question arrived in my mind. What does success mean, for me? Not for society. Not for social media. Not for people watching from the outside. Not even for my past self. What does my success look like now? For months, I had been measuring success by the wrong tools. By how stable my relationship looked from the outside, by how productive I was, by how perfectly I could communicate, by how strong I appeared. But standing by that water, I finally understood something. Success isn't when your life looks perfect. Success is when your heart feels honest. And that realization changed everything. During those 3 weeks in America, my marriage had gone through waves, heavy conversations, long silences, small hopes, tiny reconciliations. Nothing was tidy. Nothing was linear. But for the first time, I stopped trying to force a happy ending. I started focusing on small truths instead. I remembered how we used to laugh. I remembered the nights we stayed up dreaming. I remembered the gentle parts, the ones that often get buried under arguments and fear. And slowly, I realized that success in love isn't about never breaking. It's about choosing to rebuild, even if you're rebuilding slowly. There, by the bridge, I whispered one simple English sentence, practicing it slowly, the way a beginner practices their first phrase. My success is being real. The words felt warm, steady, alive. Not dramatic. Not poetic. Just real. And then, as if timed perfectly with my breath, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my partner. 8 words that somehow landed right in the center of my chest. I'm still here. Can we keep trying? Simple English. Simple hope. But it changed the shape of my entire day. I typed back slowly, choosing each word with care, almost like language practice. Yes. One step at a time. And in that moment, I understood something about English learning, love, and life. You don't need perfect grammar to make a relationship work. You don't need advanced vocabulary to heal. You don't need flawless fluency to be understood. You just need honesty spoken gently. Maybe that's the real success. Not the big achievements. Not the perfect conversations. Not the polished image. Real success is waking up and choosing the life you want. Even if it's messy, even if it's uncertain, even if it scares you. Because sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever say is, I'm willing to try again. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. When healing became a daily practice. There's something funny about healing. You expect it to arrive like a lightning bolt, loud, dramatic, impossible to miss. But in reality, healing usually walks in quietly, like someone taking off their shoes before stepping into your living room. And that's exactly how it felt during the last days of my 3-week journey in the United States. I wasn't having any big breakthroughs. I wasn't solving all my marriage problems in one magical moment. I wasn't suddenly becoming fluent in every language of love or English. Instead, everything started shifting in small, steady ways, almost invisible unless you paid attention. One morning in Chicago, I woke up earlier than usual. The light coming through the window was soft and gold, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel a weight pressing on my chest. Nothing huge had happened. No dramatic phone call. No perfect conversation. No emotional fireworks. I just felt lighter. And sometimes lighter is the beginning of everything. I made a cup of coffee and sat by the window, listening to the quiet hum of the city waking up. And while I was stirring the coffee, I caught myself practicing a simple English sentence out loud, almost like a child learning to speak. I'm learning to be gentle with myself. The rhythm felt slow. The words felt warm. The meaning felt true. In that moment, I realized something important. Healing is not a destination. Healing is a practice. Just like learning English. Just like building a marriage. Just like growing into the version of yourself you're proud of. You don't become fluent in one day. You don't become patient in one day. You don't rebuild trust in one day. You practice. Every morning. Every conversation. Every choice. Sometimes that practice looks like saying, "I'm sorry." Sometimes it looks like saying, "I need a moment." Sometimes it looks like letting go of the urge to win an argument. And sometimes, maybe the hardest one, it looks like forgiving yourself for what you didn't know before. Later that week, I had another call with my partner. We didn't talk about the big issues. We didn't revisit old wounds. We just shared our days, slowly, gently, like two people learning a new language together. And honestly, it felt new. She told me she was proud of the small changes she noticed. Not big changes. Not perfect changes. Just small ones, the kind that show you're actually trying. And I felt something shift in me again. It wasn't the kind of epic transformation people write in books. It was quieter, softer, more human. But those are the changes that last. As I walked through a small neighborhood in Chicago later that night, I saw a street artist painting a simple phrase on a brick wall. Nothing fancy. Just 4 little words. Healing takes daily courage. And I stopped walking. Because it felt like the universe was whispering directly to me. Courage doesn't always look like fighting. Sometimes courage looks like breathing. Like showing up. Like saying, "Let's try again tomorrow." Like practicing English even when you forget simple words. Like loving someone even when you're scared. That night I wrote a sentence in my notebook, slow, careful handwriting, like a student practicing. My healing is not a race. It is a rhythm. A rhythm of effort. A rhythm of honesty. A rhythm of hope. And if you're watching this video right now because you feel lost, tired, or ready to give up, on English, on love, on yourself, I want you to remember this. You're not broken. You're unfolding. One quiet day at a time. And every small step you take counts more than you think. The conversation that finally set us free. There is a moment in every relationship when avoidance stops working. You can distract yourself. You can pretend you're fine. You can stay busy, stay moving, stay loud. But eventually, life places you in a quiet space and whispers, "It's time to talk." My moment arrived on the last Friday of my 3-week journey in the United States. In a small park in Denver, with trees shaking gently in the wind and the sky stretching wide like an empty page. I had walked there without any plan. No script in my mind. No prepared speech. Just a tired heart ready to stop running. And that's when my phone rang. It was her. For a second, I froze. I wasn't afraid of her voice. I was afraid of what my voice might reveal. But I answered. And the first thing she said wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't poetic. It was just one soft sentence in simple English. "We can't keep hurting each other like this." Her voice cracked on the last word. And something inside me cracked too. We didn't jump into accusations or old arguments. We didn't list the past or defend our positions like lawyers. Instead, for the first time in a long time, we talked slowly, carefully, honestly, like two people finally admitting that love is real, but so is pain. I told her how the silence between us had felt like a storm I couldn't escape. She told me how she kept waking up with questions no one answered. I admitted that I was scared of losing her. She admitted she was scared of trying again. It wasn't a perfect conversation. but it was a true one. And somewhere in the middle of that honesty, something unexpected happened. We both stopped crying. Not because everything was solved, but because the truth had finally been spoken out loud. There was a long pause, the kind of pause where two people breathe at the same time without even realizing it. And then she whispered a sentence I will never forget. Maybe we don't need to go back. Maybe we can start new. Those 8 words changed everything. Not because they erased the past, but because they gave us permission to imagine a different future. I felt myself nodding even though she couldn't see me. I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. Not excitement, not relief, but something calmer. Something steady. Hope. We spent almost an hour on the phone, speaking with the gentleness of people touching a fragile object they both want to protect. We practiced a new kind of English, emotional English, the kind that builds connection even with simple words. I hear you. I'm with you. I understand. I want better for us. And as we talked, I learned something strange but powerful. Sometimes your heart becomes fluent again the moment you stop pretending it's fine. When the call ended, I didn't feel fixed. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel certain about the future. But I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. A quiet, steady kind of peace. The kind that comes when two people decide to stop fighting each other and start fighting for each other. I sat on the park bench for a long time, listening to the wind swirl around me, watching families laugh in the distance. And I whispered one final sentence to myself, slowly, like practicing a line I never want to forget. Love grows again when honesty finally enters the room. And maybe that's the lesson you're meant to hear today, the one hidden inside this slow, simple English story. You don't save a relationship with perfect words. You save it with true ones. Even if they're spoken softly. Even if they're spoken late. Even if your voice shakes. Especially then. Redefining success in love and in life. There's a quiet moment that often arrives after a long season of struggle. A moment when you finally ask yourself a question you've avoided for years. What does success really mean for me? During the last stretch of my 3-week journey in the United States, this question followed me everywhere. It showed up while I was sitting on airplanes, waiting for my coffee, walking through unfamiliar streets, and watching couples laugh in restaurants. It wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent. It was just steady. Like a soft knock from inside my own chest. For so long, I thought success meant getting everything right. A relationship without fights. A life without mistakes. A perfect path, perfectly walked. But real life doesn't move like that. Real life is messy. Real love is imperfect. Real growth is slow. One morning in Austin, I found myself staring at a reflection in a cafe window. Not the successful version of myself I always tried to present, but a tired human being who had survived heartbreak, miscommunication, loneliness, fear, and somehow was still standing. Still hoping. Still trying. And that's when it hit me. Maybe that was success. Not the shiny version. Not the Instagram version. Not the look how perfect we are version. Success was simply staying open when it would be easier to shut down. I took out my notebook, the same one I'd been using to practice simple English sentences each night, and wrote a new line at the top of a blank page. Success is choosing love, even after failure. I said it out loud, slowly, the way you would practice a new sentence in a language you're still learning. And something in the rhythm felt right. Gentle. Human. That afternoon, I talked to my partner again. This time, we didn't talk about the past or the pain. We talked about who we wanted to become. As individuals. As partners. As two imperfect humans trying to build something real. She told me she wanted to communicate with more kindness. I told her I wanted to listen without fear. We both agreed we wanted to grow, not fast, not dramatically, but steadily. And there, in that small conversation, I realized something that changed the entire direction of our story. Success in love isn't measured by how rarely you fall. It's measured by how gently you rise together. In the final days of my trip, I started noticing success in the small things. The patience in my breath. The softness in my voice. The calmness in my steps. The simple English phrases that carried more emotion than complicated ones ever did. I wasn't trying to fix everything anymore. I wasn't trying to win. I wasn't trying to pretend. I was learning to be real, with myself, with her, with life. And strangely, that honesty made everything around me feel lighter. It didn't make things perfect. It didn't erase what had happened. But it created space, the kind of space where something new, something gentle, something hopeful could grow. If you're watching this right now because you're exhausted, because you feel like you've failed, because you're struggling with English, with love, with yourself, hear this. Success is not a finish line. Success is a direction. It's the moment you choose to learn instead of hide. The moment you choose to speak instead of shut down. The moment you choose to stay open when fear tells you to close. The new beginning didn't know needed. There's a strange moment at the end of every journey. The moment when you pack your suitcase, zip it shut, and suddenly realize you're not the same person who opened it weeks ago. That moment found me on my last night in the United States, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed surrounded by half-folded clothes and quiet memories. The room felt still, almost like it was holding its breath with me. My phone lay beside me, screen dark, but warm from the calls and conversations that had shaped the past 3 weeks. And while I stared at it, I whispered one simple English sentence, slow, steady, almost like a soft promise. I'm ready for a new beginning. Those words didn't come from confidence. They came from honesty. The past 3 weeks had stretched my heart in 100 different directions. Long walks through unfamiliar cities. Quiet mornings filled with reflection. Phone calls that cracked me open. Moments of hope that surprised me. And tiny steps toward understanding what love and success really mean. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It wasn't a perfect healing story. It was something gentler, a subtle shift in how I carried myself. As I folded the last shirt into my suitcase, I remembered a moment from earlier that day. I had been standing in line at an airport cafe, practicing a simple English phrase I wanted to tell my partner later. I'm learning, and I'm not giving up. 8 small words. But they carried the weight of a heart trying again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud. Not proud of being strong, but proud of being real. That evening, my partner called. Her voice sounded calm, almost peaceful. We didn't talk about fixing everything. We didn't talk about timelines or expectations. Instead, she said something that made the world feel softer around me. Let's grow into something better. Together. Not return. Not rewind. Not pretend. Grow. And in that moment, I realized that maybe this entire journey, the flights, the long walks, the quiet mornings, the lonely nights, wasn't just about healing a relationship. It was also about healing the way I saw myself. We talked slowly, like two people learning a new language. Not English, but a language built on patience, clarity, and gentleness. And without planning it, I said something I didn't even know I had the courage to say. I'm ready to love without fear again. She didn't respond right away. And that silence felt like a breath we were finally taking together. When she did speak, her voice was soft. Me too. And just like that, the story shifted, not into a perfect ending, but into an honest beginning. After the call, I stepped outside the hotel for one last walk. The night air was cool, almost tender, and the city lights reflected on the pavement like quiet stars. I walked slowly, repeating a simple rhythm in my mind. I'm learning. I'm healing. I'm growing. I'm becoming. And the truth is, that's all any of us can do. If you're watching this video because you feel lost, tired, or unsure of your future, in love, in English, in life, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't need a dramatic breakthrough to start again. Sometimes all you need is one honest moment, one soft conversation, one small decision to keep moving. And that small decision can change everything. When I finally returned to my room and turned off the lights, the last sentence I whispered, slow, gentle, almost like a prayer, was this. This is not the end. This is the beginning of who I'm becoming. And that is where today's story comes to a gentle pause. If you're still here, listening closely until the final seconds, then you already know something important. English isn't just a language we study. It's a language we feel. And every small story, every slow sentence, every quiet moment you just listened to, is another step toward understanding both English and yourself a little better. But the journey doesn't end here. Because there is still one question we haven't answered. A question that might change everything in the next video. What happens when the heart speaks a truth we're not ready to hear? I'll share that part soon. So if you want to follow the story, improve your listening, and discover what comes after this turning point, subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell so you don't miss the next episode. And leave a comment telling me what part of today's story stayed with you the most. Your words help me shape the next chapter. Thank you for listening slowly, thinking deeply, and learning with me today. The next video is already on its way. And trust me, you'll want to hear what happens next.